I'm Jessica Martin, 27 years old, and I never thought I'd hear my own brother destroy my children's hearts with 8 brutal words. Standing in my childhood kitchen this Thanksgiving, I watched Cameron lean down to my 8-year-old daughter Emma and 6-year-old son Tyler, his voice dripping with cruel satisfaction, as he whispered, "Your mom is the family failure who can't even pay her own bills." The turkey might as well have turned to ash in my mouth as I saw my baby's confused faces turn toward me, their innocent eyes suddenly filled with questions I wasn't ready to answer. But Cameron had no idea about the inheritance documents hidden in my bedroom drawer that would change everything. Before we dive into this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of triumph over adversity. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. The past year had been a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. After my divorce from Derek, I was working 3 part-time jobs, just to keep our small apartment in Riverside. Monday through Wednesday, I cleaned office buildings from 5 in the morning until noon. Thursday and Friday, I worked retail at the mall, dealing with demanding customers who treated me like I was invisible. Weekends meant serving tables at Danny's Diner, my feet aching so badly by Sunday night that I could barely walk to tuck my kids into bed. Every month felt like a mathematical impossibility, trying to stretch $700 to cover rent, groceries, utilities, and everything Emma and Tyler needed. What made the struggle even harder was watching Cameron flaunt his success at every family gathering. My older brother had built a tech company from nothing, or so he claimed, and now lived in a mansion in the hills with his perfect wife Sandra and their twin boys. He drove a different luxury car every few months, wore custom suits that cost more than my monthly income, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how blessed he was. Meanwhile, I showed up to family dinners in the same 3 dresses I rotated, watching my children's faces as they compared their worn sneakers to their cousins' designer clothes. But Cameron didn't know the secret that kept me going through the darkest nights. 6 months earlier, I had received an unexpected visit from Harold Brennan, my late grandmother's attorney. Grandma Rose had passed away 2 years ago, and we all assumed her modest estate had been divided equally among her children. Harold's revelation changed everything. Grandma had secretly established a private trust worth over $12 million, built from decades of smart real estate investments that nobody in the family knew about. The trust included commercial properties throughout the state, apartment complexes, and even a small shopping center that had been generating income for years. The catch was Grandma's final letter, written in her shaky handwriting just weeks before she died. She had watched our family dynamics for years, seen how Cameron received everything easily while I struggled and scraped for every small victory. "My dearest Jessica," the letter read, "you have always been the strongest of my grandchildren, though you don't know it yet. I am leaving you everything, but with one condition. You must prove to yourself that you can stand on your own feet before you claim what is rightfully yours. Spend 1 full year living by your own strength, making your own way, before you touch a single dollar of this inheritance. Only then will you truly understand your own worth." The trust documents sat in a manila envelope hidden beneath my mattress, a safety net I was forbidden to use until I had proven something to myself that I still didn't fully understand. So while Cameron assumed I was failing, I was actually choosing to struggle, honoring the final wishes of the one person who had always believed in me. Every night, when I counted coins to buy milk, every time I had to tell Emma we couldn't afford the school field trip, every moment of exhaustion and humiliation was a step toward something bigger than money. But Cameron saw only weakness where Grandma had seen strength, and he was about to use that perceived weakness to destroy everything I held dear. Thanksgiving dinner started innocently enough, with the usual family chaos of too many people crammed into my parents' dining room. My mother had outdone herself with the decorations, and the smell of her famous stuffing filled the air as cousins caught up and children ran between the adults' legs. I should have known something was wrong when Cameron kept checking his watch and exchanging meaningful glances with our sister Michelle. The first sign of trouble came when Dad asked everyone to quiet down for the blessing, and Cameron interrupted with what he called a family announcement. "Before we give thanks," Cameron said, standing up and smoothing his expensive tie, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room. We all know Jessica is going through a tough time, but I've learned some disturbing information about just how bad things have gotten." He pulled out his phone and started reading from what looked like official documents. Jessica received a foreclosure notice 3 weeks ago. Her electricity was shut off for non-payment last month. And according to my research, she owes over $15,000 in various debts. The room fell silent except for the sound of my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I had no idea how he had obtained this information, but every word was true. My parents exchanged horrified looks while my aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Uncle Robert cleared his throat and asked how Cameron knew these details, but Cameron was just getting started. "I hired a private investigator," he announced proudly, "because I was concerned about Emma and Tyler's well-being. And what I discovered is that their mother is not just struggling financially, she's completely irresponsible with money." He began listing every late payment, every overdraft fee, every desperate decision I had made to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Each revelation felt like a physical blow, made worse by the way my family members avoided making eye contact with me. But the cruelest moment came when Cameron turned to my children, who had been quietly coloring at the kids' table. "Emma, Tyler, come here for a minute," he called sweetly. My babies walked over trustingly, and Cameron knelt down to their eye level with what looked like genuine concern. "I want you to know that Uncle Cameron is here to help. Your mom is trying her best, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes with money. If things get really bad at home, if there's no food or if the lights go out again, I want you to call me immediately. Can you do that for Uncle Cameron?" Emma nodded solemnly while Tyler looked confused, and I felt something inside me break as I watched my brother turn my children into his allies against me. The intervention that followed was orchestrated with military precision. Michelle had prepared a folder of information about financial counseling services and parenting support groups. My mother kept wringing her hands and asking why I hadn't told them how bad things were, while my father sat in silence, clearly disappointed in his youngest daughter. Cameron presented himself as the concerned big brother, offering solutions that sounded generous, but came with strings attached. He would pay my rent for 6 months, but only if I agreed to turn over my bank account information to him for oversight. He would cover Emma and Tyler's school expenses, but I had to sign a document giving him emergency custody rights in case of future financial crisis. Every suggestion felt like a trap, but the worst part was watching my children absorb the message that their mother was incompetent and dangerous. When 7-year-old Tyler asked quietly if we were going to lose our house, I saw Cameron smile with satisfaction. He had successfully planted the seed of fear in my children's minds, and now they would always wonder if Mom was about to fail them. As we drove home that night, Emma asked why I hadn't told Uncle Cameron about my job at the diner, and I realized she was already learning to question whether I was telling the truth about anything. That night, after putting Emma and Tyler to bed with extra hugs and reassurances, I discovered the most disturbing evidence of Cameron's interference. Going through my mail more carefully than usual, I found envelope after envelope that had been opened and resealed. Credit card offers, bank statements, even correspondence from Emma's school had been tampered with. Cameron had somehow gained access to my mailbox, and had been monitoring my financial situation for months. The violation felt worse than any physical assault, knowing that my own brother had been documenting every struggle, every small failure, building a case against me while I trusted him as family. The attacks on my livelihood began subtly, but escalated with devastating efficiency. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I received a call from my supervisor at the cleaning company, informing me that they were restructuring and would no longer need my services. When I pressed for details, she reluctantly admitted that someone had called claiming to be a former client, reporting that I had been stealing from offices during my shifts. The accusations were completely false, but the company couldn't risk their reputation. By the following week, similar mysterious complaints had reached my other 2 employers. The retail manager at the mall said someone had reported me for being intoxicated at work, while the owner of Danny's Diner received an anonymous tip that I was providing poor service and driving customers away. Within 10 days, I had lost all 3 jobs, and each employer mentioned receiving multiple calls from concerned citizens who seemed to know specific details about my work schedule and personal life. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental, and when I confronted Cameron, he expressed shock and offered to help me find new employment. His assistance came in the form of a loan with terms that made my stomach turn. He would provide $2,000 immediately to cover my immediate expenses, but the contract included clauses that would give him power of attorney over my finances and the right to make decisions about Emma and Tyler's living arrangements if I defaulted on any payment. The legal maneuvering began with a call from family services that left me shaking with rage and terror. A caseworker named Mrs. Patterson arrived at my apartment with a clipboard and a concerned expression, explaining that they had received reports about unsafe living conditions and potential child neglect. She walked through every room, documenting the outdated appliances, the small bedrooms, and the general wear and tear that comes with poverty. Mrs. Patterson was professional but thorough, asking Emma and Tyler questions about whether they ever went to bed hungry, whether Mommy ever seemed sad or angry, and whether they felt safe at home. The investigation revealed Cameron's fingerprints all over the complaint. Someone had provided specific details about our morning routine, describing how I sometimes sent the kids to school with peanut butter sandwiches 3 days in a row when money was tight. The anonymous caller knew that Tyler still wet the bed occasionally, and that Emma had missed 2 weeks of school with the flu, because I couldn't afford the doctor's visit. These were intimate details that only family would know, and the betrayal cut deeper than any financial hardship. Cameron's next move was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation disguised as brotherly concern. He arranged for a family meeting at my parents' house, where he presented a detailed custody proposal that would temporarily place Emma and Tyler in his care while I got back on my feet. The document was professionally prepared by his attorney and included provisions for weekly supervised visits and gradual reunification once I met certain financial benchmarks. My parents, worn down by weeks of worry and Cameron's careful presentation of evidence, actually seemed to think this was a reasonable solution. The custody papers cited my recent job losses, the ongoing investigation by family services, and what Cameron termed my pattern of financial instability that creates an unsafe environment for minor children. He had photographs of our apartment, taken somehow without my permission, that highlighted every flaw and imperfection. The broken window latch in Tyler's room, the peeling paint in the hallway, the outdated smoke detector that I hadn't been able to replace yet, everything was documented and presented as evidence of my failure as a mother. The breaking point came when I discovered that Cameron had been coaching Emma and Tyler during their weekend visits to his house. Tyler innocently repeated conversations where Uncle Cameron had explained that sometimes children needed to live with relatives who could take better care of them. Emma, trying to be helpful, mentioned that Uncle Cameron had asked her lots of questions about whether I ever cried at night or seemed scared about paying bills. My own children were being turned into witnesses against me, and they didn't even understand what was happening. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy, who looked embarrassed to be serving papers to a woman holding a 6-year-old's hand. My landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, had always been understanding about late payments, but suddenly he was demanding immediate payment of back rent plus penalties. When I called him, he reluctantly admitted that someone had offered to buy out my lease for 3 times the monthly rent, claiming they wanted to move their elderly mother into the unit immediately. The buyer's name was listed as Mountain View Properties LLC, and when I researched the company, it traced back to one of Cameron's business associates. For 3 nights, Emma, Tyler, and I slept in my 12-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat. I told the kids we were having an adventure, camping in the car like pioneers, but I could see the fear in their eyes every time a police car drove by. We washed up in the laundromat's bathroom, and I bought them breakfast from vending machines while pretending that eating Pop-Tarts and chocolate milk in the front seat was a special treat. On the 3rd night, Tyler asked quietly if this was why Uncle Cameron said I needed help taking care of them, and I nearly broke down completely. Cameron's final ultimatum came in the form of a registered letter delivered to the laundromat where we were camped. The document was an official-looking contract that would transfer all rights to any future inheritance or family assets to Cameron in exchange for immediate housing, financial support, and guaranteed custody of Emma and Tyler. The terms were generous in the short term, but would leave me with nothing in the long run. At the bottom of the contract was a handwritten note in Cameron's familiar script: "Jessica, this is your last chance to do what's right for your children. Sign this, and your problems disappear. Refuse, and I'll make sure you lose them forever." The worst betrayal came from the person I trusted most after my children. Michelle had always been my closest sibling, the middle child who understood what it was like to live in Cameron's shadow. We had shared secrets since childhood, supported each other through difficult relationships, and I had been the maid of honor at her wedding just 3 years earlier. So when she called asking to meet for coffee while Cameron was watching Emma and Tyler for the afternoon, I thought she was reaching out to help me find a way through this nightmare. Instead, Michelle sat across from me at Starbucks with tears in her eyes and a folder of documents in her hands. "Jessica, I'm so sorry," she whispered, "but I think you need professional help. Cameron showed me some things that really worry me about your mental state." The folder contained printouts of our private text conversations from the past 6 months, screenshots of social media posts where I had vented about feeling overwhelmed, and even photos from my apartment that I had never taken or authorized. Michelle had been collecting evidence against me for weeks, documenting every moment of vulnerability I had shared with her. The betrayal went deeper than I could have imagined. Michelle revealed that she had been meeting with Cameron's attorney, providing detailed accounts of our phone conversations where I had confessed to feeling like a failure as a mother. She had recorded me crying about not being able to afford Emma's birthday party or Tyler's new school clothes, and those recordings were now part of Cameron's custody case. "I thought I was helping," Michelle sobbed, "but now I realize how this looks. Cameron convinced me that you were having a breakdown, and that documenting everything would help get you the support you need." The setup at Emma's school play was orchestrated with cruel precision. Cameron had purchased tickets for the entire extended family, turning what should have been a celebration of my daughter's achievement into a public humiliation. As Emma took the stage as the lead in her class's production of The 3 Little Pigs, Cameron began loudly whispering to other parents about his concerns for his troubled sister. He pointed out my thrift store outfit, mentioned that Emma had been staying with him because of housing issues, and suggested that the school counselor might want to check in on the family situation. During intermission, Cameron approached Emma's teacher, Mrs. Henderson, with what he presented as concerned questions about Emma's behavior in class. Had she seemed withdrawn lately? Was she having trouble concentrating? Had she mentioned anything about changes at home? Mrs. Henderson, who had always been supportive, suddenly looked at me with new suspicion. When Emma forgot one of her lines during the second act, Cameron shook his head sadly and commented to nearby parents that stress at home was clearly affecting the poor child's performance. The financial destruction reached its climax when my bank account was mysteriously frozen pending investigation of suspicious activity. Someone had reported multiple small deposits and withdrawals that suggested money laundering or fraud, and the bank was required to hold all funds until the matter could be resolved. The suspicious transactions were actually my legitimate earnings from odd jobs and side gigs, payments for babysitting neighbors' children, and cleaning houses under the table. But presented in a certain light, the pattern looked like exactly the kind of financial irregularity that would concern authorities. With no access to my bank account and no income, I was forced to accept Cameron's offer of temporary housing in what he called the guest cottage behind his mansion. The cottage was actually a converted garage with basic utilities and barely enough space for 3 people, but it was better than sleeping in the car. Cameron presented this arrangement to our parents as generous brotherly support, while making it clear to me that I was now completely dependent on his goodwill. The psychological manipulation intensified once I was living on Cameron's property. He established house rules that included curfews, restrictions on visitors, and requirements that I account for every hour Emma and Tyler spent outside the cottage. He installed security cameras that he claimed were for everyone's safety, but that clearly monitored my every movement. When neighbors or family members visited, Cameron would casually mention how worried he was about me, pointing out that I seemed depressed and overwhelmed by basic responsibilities. The breaking point came during a family barbecue where Cameron staged what appeared to be a mental health crisis. He had been gradually increasing the pressure on me, criticizing my parenting decisions, questioning my judgment, and undermining my authority with Emma and Tyler. When I finally snapped and raised my voice, demanding that he stop interfering with my children, Cameron calmly called our parents over and suggested that my outburst proved I was becoming unstable and potentially dangerous. My parents, already primed by weeks of Cameron's careful manipulation, agreed that I needed professional help and suggested that Emma and Tyler should stay in the main house until I could get better. That night, I sat alone in the converted garage, while my children slept in luxury bedrooms 100 yards away, and I seriously considered signing Cameron's contract. The isolation was complete. My family saw me as mentally ill, my children were being turned against me, and I had no financial resources to fight back. But as I held the inheritance documents that Cameron didn't know existed, I realized that he was about to make a fatal mistake. His desperation was showing, and the more pressure he applied, the more evidence I was gathering of his systematic campaign to destroy me. The question was whether I could hold on long enough to turn the tables, or if he would succeed in taking my children away permanently before I could reveal the truth about who really held the power in this family. My investigation into Cameron's true situation began with a simple internet search that revealed the first crack in his perfect facade. Mountain View Properties LLC, the company that had bought out my lease, was facing multiple lawsuits for breach of contract and failure to pay construction bills. Digging deeper through public records, I discovered that Cameron's tech company, which he claimed was thriving, had actually been hemorrhaging money for over a year. The state business registry showed liens against the company for unpaid taxes, and a quick search of court records revealed that 3 former business partners had filed suit against Cameron for fraud and embezzlement. The magnitude of Cameron's financial desperation became clear when I found bankruptcy documents that had been filed and then withdrawn at the last minute. His company owed over $4 million to creditors, and his personal guarantees meant that his house, cars, and other assets were all at risk. The luxury lifestyle he flaunted was built on credit cards and loans that were now coming due, and according to the court filings, he had already borrowed against his children's college funds and his wife's jewelry collection. But the most damning discovery was a series of emails I found by accessing Cameron's old laptop, which he had carelessly left in the cottage during one of his inspections of my living situation. The correspondence with a lawyer named Gerald Hutchins revealed the true scope of Cameron's scheme. He had known about Grandma Rose's inheritance for 8 months, having somehow obtained information from Harold Brennan's office through a former employee who now worked for Cameron's company. The emails detailed a plan to systematically destroy my credibility and force me to sign away my rights to the inheritance before I even knew it existed. The conspiracy involved more people than I had realized. Gerald Hutchins had connections with the private investigator who had been following me, the family services caseworker who had investigated my home, and even the anonymous callers who had cost me my jobs. Cameron had been paying for a comprehensive campaign to manufacture evidence of my incompetence, spending money he didn't have to steal, money that should have been mine. The emails showed payments totaling over $60,000 for surveillance, legal fees, and bribes to various officials. Cameron's timeline was more urgent than I had understood. According to his correspondence with creditors, he had exactly 90 days from Thanksgiving to produce proof of significant assets, or face criminal charges for defrauding investors. His business partners were threatening to expose his financial manipulations to federal authorities, and his wife Sandra was preparing to file for divorce and seize whatever assets remained. The inheritance wasn't just a windfall for Cameron, it was his only hope of avoiding complete ruin and possible prison time. The most chilling revelation was Cameron's backup plan if he couldn't force me to sign over the inheritance. Email threads with his attorney discussed the possibility of having me declared mentally incompetent, with Cameron appointed as guardian of both my children and any assets I might inherit. They had researched the legal requirements for such a declaration, and were building a case based on my financial struggles, the family services investigation, and what they planned to present as erratic behavior patterns. If successful, Cameron would gain control of the $12 million inheritance while presenting himself as the responsible family member, saving his sister from her own poor judgment. But Cameron had made one critical error that would ultimately destroy his carefully constructed plan. In his desperation to monitor my every move, he had installed surveillance equipment in the cottage without proper legal authority. The recordings he was making could not be used in court, and the invasion of privacy actually constituted a criminal offense. Moreover, several of his communications with Gerald Hutchins discussed activities that clearly crossed the line into extortion and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence folder I was building grew thicker each day as I documented Cameron's campaign against me. I had recordings of him coaching Emma and Tyler to say negative things about me, photographs of the surveillance equipment in the cottage, copies of his financial records, showing his desperate situation, and the email correspondence that proved his malicious intent. But the most powerful evidence was Cameron's own arrogance. He had become so confident in his success that he was openly bragging about his strategy to family members who were beginning to question his methods. The turning point came when I realized that Cameron's scheme had a fatal flaw built into its very foundation. Grandma Rose's trust documents included specific protections against exactly the kind of coercion Cameron was attempting. The original lawyer, Harold Brennan, had anticipated that family members might try to pressure me into giving up my inheritance, so the trust included provisions that would void any agreements signed under duress or threat. Furthermore, any attempt to manipulate or defraud the beneficiary would result in permanent disqualification from ever receiving any portion of the estate. Armed with this knowledge, I made the decision to let Cameron dig his hole even deeper while I prepared my counterstrike. Every day he continued his campaign against me, Every new humiliation he inflicted, every additional piece of evidence he fabricated was actually building the case that would eventually destroy him. The inheritance documents sitting in my bedroom weren't just my salvation, they were Cameron's death warrant, and he was too blinded by greed and desperation to see the trap he was walking into. My secret meeting with Harold Brennan took place in his downtown office on a Tuesday morning while Cameron believed I was attending a court-mandated parenting class. Harold was a distinguished man in his 70s who had known our family for decades, and his eyes sparkled with something that looked like satisfaction when I finally contacted him. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, settling back in his leather chair. "Your grandmother predicted this would happen, you know. She said Cameron would eventually show his true colors, and she wanted to make sure you had the tools to protect yourself when that day came." Harold explained that Grandma Rose had been far more aware of family dynamics than any of us realized. She had watched Cameron's entitled behavior for years, and had specifically structured the inheritance to prevent him from ever gaining control over it. The trust included provisions that would not only protect my rights, but would actually punish anyone who attempted to coerce or defraud me. "If we can prove that Cameron engaged in systematic harassment, or attempted to force you to sign away your rights," Harold explained, "he'll be permanently barred from ever receiving anything from your grandmother's estate, including the small gifts she had originally planned to leave him." The documentation process began immediately, with Harold providing me with a discreet recording device and detailed instructions on how to gather legally admissible evidence. We established a secure communication system using his personal cell phone, and he connected me with a private investigator named Sarah Chen, who specialized in family fraud cases. Sarah was a former police detective who understood exactly how predators like Cameron operated, and she helped me recognize patterns of behavior that I had been too emotionally involved to see clearly. Building the case required me to become an actress in my own life, pretending to be the defeated victim Cameron wanted me to be while systematically documenting his crimes. Sarah taught me how to position my phone to capture conversations, how to save emails and text messages as legal evidence, and how to document the financial damage Cameron had caused through his interference with my employment and housing. Every humiliation became an opportunity to gather proof of his malicious intent. The breakthrough came when Michelle finally realized the full extent of Cameron's manipulation. She had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with his demands for information about me, and when he asked her to lie under oath in a custody hearing, she finally understood that she was being used as a weapon against her own sister. Michelle's decision to cooperate with my investigation provided crucial evidence, including recordings she had made of Cameron instructing her on what to say to authorities, and copies of documents he had asked her to sign without reading. Michelle's betrayal of Cameron was as systematic as his betrayal of me had been. She provided detailed accounts of conversations where Cameron had admitted to sabotaging my employment, revealed his financial desperation, and bragged about his ability to manipulate our parents and other family members. She also disclosed that Cameron had been secretly recording conversations with Emma and Tyler, coaching them to describe incidents that had never actually happened. The legal framework for my counterattack was more powerful than I had dared to hope. Harold connected me with a federal prosecutor who specialized in family fraud and extortion cases, and Sarah's investigation had uncovered evidence that Cameron's activities crossed multiple state and federal laws. The mail tampering alone was a federal offense, while his systematic harassment and financial sabotage constituted criminal conspiracy under state law. We weren't just building a civil case to protect my inheritance. We were building a criminal case that could send Cameron to prison. The strategy we developed was designed to let Cameron destroy himself completely before we revealed our hand. Harold explained that premature action might allow Cameron to claim he was just a concerned brother trying to help his struggling sister. But if we let him escalate his campaign to the point where his criminal intent was undeniable, we could destroy not only his legal position, but his reputation within the family and community. Sarah's surveillance of Cameron revealed just how far his desperation had driven him. She documented him paying cash to the private investigator, who had been following me, recorded him bribing building inspectors to find violations in properties I was considering renting, and captured evidence of him spreading false information about me to potential employers throughout the area. Each criminal act was carefully documented with photographs, recordings, and financial records. The most powerful evidence came from Cameron's own arrogance. As his deadline with creditors approached, he became increasingly reckless in his communications, sending emails and text messages that explicitly described his plans to steal my inheritance. He had become so confident in his success that he was already spending money he didn't have, taking out loans against the $12 million he expected to control. His greed was creating a paper trail that would make our case impossible to deny. The final piece of the puzzle was establishing a safe haven for Emma and Tyler during the confrontation that was coming. Harold helped me contact my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister who lived 2 states away, and had always been skeptical of Cameron's character. Linda agreed to take the children for an extended visit, officially for summer vacation, but actually to protect them from the chaos that would follow when I revealed Cameron's crimes to the family. As we approached the final phase of our plan, I felt a strange sense of calm for the first time in months. Cameron had spent so much energy trying to convince everyone that I was weak and incompetent, but he had actually given me exactly what I needed to destroy him. Every attack had made me stronger, every humiliation had clarified my resolve, and every piece of evidence he created against me had actually become evidence against him. Grandma Rose had been right. I did need to prove my strength to myself. But the real test wasn't surviving Cameron's attacks. It was having the courage to strike back when the time was right. The performance of my life began on a humid Monday morning when I appeared at Cameron's door with tears streaming down my face and the forged surrender documents clutched in my shaking hands. Sarah Chen had helped me prepare the fake paperwork that would make Cameron believe he was finally getting everything he wanted, my complete capitulation, and signed agreement to transfer all inheritance rights to him. The documents looked official and included clauses that would give Cameron immediate control over any assets I might receive from Grandma Rose's estate. "Cameron, I can't do this anymore," I sobbed, allowing my voice to crack with just the right amount of desperation. "You were right about everything. I'm a terrible mother. I can't handle money, and Emma and Tyler deserve better than what I can give them." Cameron's eyes lit up with barely concealed triumph as he invited me inside, offering tissues and comforting words that felt like acid in my ears. He called our parents immediately, describing my emotional breakdown and suggesting that we hold a family meeting to finalize the custody arrangements and financial agreements. The bait was irresistible to Cameron, because it played perfectly into his narrative of being the responsible brother saving his family from their own poor choices. He insisted that the signing ceremony should be public and well documented, with multiple family members present as witnesses. Cameron wanted to make sure there could be no question about my voluntary agreement to transfer custody of my children and any potential inheritance to his control. His ego demanded recognition for his sacrifice in taking on the burden of my responsibilities. During the 3 days leading up to the planned ceremony, Cameron's behavior became increasingly reckless as his confidence soared. He began openly discussing his financial plans for the inheritance money, describing investments he intended to make and debts he would pay off once he had access to Jessica's share of Grandma's estate. He bragged to his golf buddies about his brilliant strategy for protecting his sister from her own poor judgment, not realizing that Sarah Chen had infiltrated his social circle and was recording every arrogant admission. Cameron's desperation to finalize the deal led him to make critical mistakes that would seal his fate. He pressured Harold Brennan to attend the signing ceremony, claiming that the family wanted their grandmother's lawyer to witness Jessica's voluntary decision to place her children's welfare above her own selfish interests. When Harold politely declined, Cameron became aggressive, threatening to file complaints with the State Bar Association if Harold didn't cooperate with the family's wishes. The surveillance footage from Cameron's own security cameras became some of our most damning evidence as he practiced his speech for the family meeting. In recordings that he didn't know we could access, Cameron rehearsed the concerned brother act while celebrating his impending victory. He counted the months until the inheritance money would be available, planned his debt payments, and even researched vacation destinations where he could take his family once his financial problems were solved. But Cameron's most serious error was his decision to involve Emma and Tyler in the final manipulation. He brought my children to his house for what he told them would be a special celebration, where Mommy would announce some important changes to their living situation. Cameron coached them on how to react when I explained that they would be staying with Uncle Cameron permanently, teaching them to hug me and tell me they understood why this was the best choice for everyone. The recording devices Sarah had hidden throughout Cameron's house captured every moment of him manipulating my innocent children. Emma was told that Mommy was too sad to take care of them properly, and that living with Uncle Cameron would help her get better. Tyler was promised his own bedroom and toys if he was brave about not crying when Mommy explained the new arrangements. Cameron even practiced having the children thank me for making this sacrifice, because I loved them so much. The legal trap was set with precision that would have made Grandma Rose proud. Harold Brennan had prepared countersuit documents that would be filed the moment Cameron completed his fraud, charging him with extortion, conspiracy, mail fraud, and child endangerment. The federal prosecutor was standing by with arrest warrants that would be executed during the family meeting, and Sarah Chen had coordinated with local police to ensure Cameron couldn't flee when his crimes were exposed. The most satisfying element of the plan was that Cameron's own arrogance would provide the final evidence we needed. He had insisted on recording the signing ceremony himself, wanting permanent documentation of Jessica's confession that she was an unfit mother. Those recordings would instead capture Cameron's shocked reaction when he learned that the inheritance he was stealing was worth $12 million instead of the modest amount he had assumed, and his desperate attempts to justify criminal activities that had already been thoroughly documented. As the day of the confrontation approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and sadness watching Cameron prepare for what he believed would be his greatest triumph. He had spent months systematically destroying my life, turning my children against me, and convincing my family that he was the responsible one. But his greed and cruelty had blinded him to the fact that he was about to walk into a trap that would cost him everything he claimed to value. The irony was perfect. Cameron had taught me exactly how ruthless I needed to be to protect my family. Every manipulation he had used against me was about to be turned back on him with interest. The inheritance documents hidden in my bedroom weren't just my escape from poverty, they were Cameron's ticket to disgrace, financial ruin, and criminal prosecution. Grandma Rose had given me more than money. She had given me the power to ensure that people like Cameron could never hurt me or my children again. The family gathering Cameron had orchestrated took place in my parents' living room on a Sunday afternoon, with nearly 30 relatives crowded into the space to witness what they believed would be my surrender. Cameron had positioned himself at the head of the room like a prosecutor presenting his closing arguments, with the fake surrender documents spread across my father's desk and a video camera set up to record the proceedings. Emma and Tyler sat on the couch between my parents, their little faces solemn with the weight of changes they didn't fully understand. Before Jessica signs these documents, Cameron announced to the assembled family, "I want everyone to understand the sacrifice she's making for her children's welfare. This isn't easy for any of us, but sometimes love means making hard choices. He launched into a detailed presentation of my failures as a mother and financial manager, complete with charts and photographs that painted me as either mentally unstable or criminally irresponsible. The family listened with expressions of pity and concern as Cameron described the intervention that had saved Emma and Tyler from homelessness and neglect. The moment of truth came when Cameron handed me the pen and pointed to the signature line. "Jessica, are you ready to put your children's needs before your own pride?" he asked, his voice dripping with false compassion. I stood up slowly, making sure every family member could see my face clearly, and smiled for the first time in months. "Cameron, there's something important you need to know before we continue," I said, pulling out my phone and pressing play on a recording that filled the room with his own voice bragging about manipulating our grandmother's inheritance. The effect was electric. Cameron's face went white as his recorded voice described his plan to steal $12 million from his sister by destroying her reputation and taking her children away. The family members who had supported him began to realize they had been used as weapons in a criminal conspiracy, while Cameron frantically tried to grab my phone and stop the recording. But Harold Brennan was already walking through the front door with a briefcase full of legal documents and 2 federal agents who had been waiting outside. "Cameron Martin," Agent Rodriguez announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, mail tampering, and child endangerment." As Cameron was handcuffed in front of his shocked family, I pulled out the inheritance documents that revealed the true extent of Grandma Rose's estate. The $12 million trust that Cameron had been trying to steal was now permanently protected from his reach, and his criminal activities had triggered clauses that barred him from ever receiving anything from our grandmother's legacy. The evidence presentation that followed was devastating in its completeness. Sarah Chen displayed photographs of the surveillance equipment Cameron had illegally installed, recordings of him coaching my children to lie about their living situation, and financial records, showing how he had paid bribes to interfere with my employment and housing. Michelle tearfully testified about Cameron's instructions to gather damaging information about me, while our parents learned that their son had been manipulating them with carefully crafted lies for over a year. But the most damaging moment came when Agent Rodriguez played the recording of Cameron describing me as too stupid to know what she's inheriting, and explaining his plan to destroy her credibility so completely that no court would ever believe her over me. The family members who had supported Cameron's custody grab sat in stunned silence as they realized they had been complicit in criminal fraud against their own daughter and sister. Cameron's desperate attempts to justify his actions only made the situation worse. He claimed he was protecting me from making poor financial decisions, insisted that he really believed I was mentally unstable, and argued that everything he did was motivated by love for his family. But the recordings of him counting inheritance money and planning debt payments, while my children slept in a car, made his true motivations impossible to deny. The legal consequences unfolded with swift precision. Cameron's business assets were immediately frozen as part of the criminal investigation, his house was searched for additional evidence, and his wife Sandra announced that she was filing for divorce and seeking protection from his creditors. The private investigator, who had helped Cameron stalk me, was arrested as a co-conspirator, and several officials, who had accepted bribes, were suspended pending their own investigations. Emma and Tyler, who had been temporarily staying with Aunt Linda during the confrontation, returned to find their world completely changed. The fake Uncle Cameron, who had promised them stability and treats, was revealed as the monster who had tried to steal their mother's inheritance and destroy their family. But more importantly, they learned that their mother was not the failure she had been portrayed as, but a strong woman who had chosen to struggle rather than take easy money until she proved her worth to herself. The family's reaction was a mixture of shame, anger, and amazement. My parents wept as they realized how completely Cameron had manipulated them, while relatives, who had criticized my parenting, began to understand the systematic campaign that had been waged against me. Several family members who had witnessed Cameron's interventions came forward with additional evidence of his manipulative behavior, and the portrait that emerged was of a predator who had been practicing these techniques for years. But the most satisfying moment came when Cameron was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and claiming that I had somehow orchestrated everything to frame him. His desperation was complete. The inheritance he had tried to steal was forever beyond his reach, his reputation was destroyed, his marriage was over, and he faced decades in federal prison. The brother who had called me the family failure had become the family's greatest shame, while I stood holding documents that proved I was the strongest person in the room. 6 months after Cameron's arrest, Emma and Tyler had adjusted to our new life with the resilience that children somehow manage to find even after the most difficult experiences. We moved into a beautiful house in a neighborhood with excellent schools, but I made sure it was comfortable rather than ostentatious. The inheritance money sat mostly untouched while I continued working at a job I loved, having discovered that Grandma Rose was right about needing to prove my strength to myself before I could properly manage sudden wealth. The children's relationship with their extended family healed gradually, with lots of honest conversations about how Uncle Cameron had lied to everyone and why grown-ups sometimes make terrible mistakes. Emma, now 9, occasionally asked thoughtful questions about why her uncle had been so mean to us, and I tried to explain that sometimes people do bad things when they are scared about money. Tyler, 7, mostly seemed relieved that we didn't have to worry about losing our house anymore, and that Mommy didn't cry as often. My parents struggled with guilt and shame over how completely Cameron had fooled them, but they threw themselves into rebuilding relationships with Emma, Tyler, and me. Dad admitted that he had always felt Cameron was too aggressive in business, but he never imagined that ruthlessness would be turned against his own family. Mom confessed that she had been worried about my financial situation, but had trusted Cameron's expertise, instead of asking me directly what kind of help I actually needed. Michelle's cooperation with my legal case had earned her forgiveness, but our relationship would never be quite the same. She had learned that her middle child tendency to avoid conflict had made her an easy target for Cameron's manipulation, and she was working with a therapist to understand how she had been used against me. We slowly rebuilt our sisterly bond, but with new boundaries and a clearer understanding of how family loyalty should work. Cameron's legal troubles multiplied as federal investigators uncovered the full extent of his financial crimes. The fraud against me was just one piece of a larger pattern that included embezzling from his business partners, falsifying tax documents, and running what amounted to a Ponzi scheme with investor money. He eventually pleaded guilty to 14 federal felonies, and was sentenced to 12 years in prison with requirements to pay restitution to all his victims. The most unexpected consequence of the whole ordeal was the discovery of Cameron's other victims. 3 women came forward after his arrest to describe similar campaigns of harassment and financial sabotage they had experienced after rejecting Cameron's romantic advances or business proposals. Sarah Chen helped connect these women with legal resources, and their testimony contributed to additional charges that extended Cameron's prison sentence significantly. My relationship with money changed completely through the experience of having it after learning to live without it. The inheritance gave me security and options, but it didn't make me happy in the way I had once imagined wealth would. Instead, I found satisfaction in using some of the money to establish a foundation that helped single mothers facing systematic harassment or financial abuse. The Jessica Martin Foundation provided legal assistance, temporary housing, and counseling services to women whose families or partners were using economic violence to control them. Emma and Tyler became unofficial ambassadors for the foundation, helping to organize fundraising events and speaking to groups about how children can recover from family trauma. Their resilience and wisdom often amazed adults who heard them explain that their uncle's meanness had actually made their family stronger. Emma developed a particular interest in helping other children whose parents were going through custody battles, while Tyler became passionate about financial literacy education for kids. The most profound change was in my own sense of self-worth. Cameron's campaign had been designed to convince me that I was incompetent and weak, but surviving it had proved exactly the opposite. I had endured systematic psychological warfare, protected my children, gathered evidence against a sophisticated criminal, and ultimately triumphed over someone who had every advantage. Grandma Rose's test had been more challenging than either of us had anticipated, but I had passed with honors. 2 years later, when the legal cases were finally settled and Cameron was safely behind bars, I returned to visit Grandma Rose's grave with Emma and Tyler. We brought flowers and a copy of the Foundation's first annual report, which showed that we had helped over 200 families escape situations similar to what we had endured. Great-Grandma Rose, Emma said solemnly, we wanted you to know that we figured out what you meant about being strong. As I stood there with my children, watching them place flowers on their great-grandmother's headstone, I realized that the inheritance had been the least important part of what Grandma Rose had given me. The real gift was the knowledge that I could survive anything, protect my family against any threat, and build something meaningful from even the most painful experiences. Cameron had tried to destroy me by calling me the family failure, but he had actually helped me discover that I was the family's greatest success story. The foundation continues to grow, and Emma and Tyler are developing into confident young people who understand that their strength comes not from what they have, but from what they can overcome. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the year of struggle before I claimed my inheritance, and the answer is always no. Those months of poverty, humiliation, and fear taught me lessons that no amount of money could buy, and they gave me the credibility to help other families facing similar battles. Have you ever had someone in your family who tried to tear you down when you needed support the most? What would you have done in my situation, when faced with someone willing to use your own children against you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe that true strength comes from protecting the people you love. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when they needed it most, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the people who call you a failure are just afraid of your success. Keep fighting for what matters most, and never let anyone convince you that you're not worth defending.